right, so this is take two, although the other one isn't even alive because I didn't push the fucking button.
This is take one, man.
Take one. Oh, there you go. There you go, Art. There you go. I appreciate you. All right, so we're going to start from the top.
Flack Talk with James Canning. The podcast with the inside scoop on journalists from San Diego and across the nation. If you're a communications pro, have a nose for news, or you're just nosy, this is a podcast for you. Now here's your host, James Canning.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Flack Talk. I'm really excited for today's guest. When you look at a town and you work in a town, there are publications that serve a certain role. And today's guest is Art Castañares. He's the publisher and editor of La Prensa. And it's the first time I've ever had, the owner, the publisher on Flack Talk of any publication. And so I'm really excited about that. Thanks, Art, for being here.
This is great, James. I'm glad we can do it.
Yeah, Art and I have gotten the opportunity to work together a little bit during my time working at the county of San Diego. And I mentioned, publications have a certain role. And Art has shaped this publication to be one that works to break news, utilize sources, sometimes share information that I'm sure he'll tell you he doesn't think people want you to know. But it's, these types of publications, as well as all news outlets, are here to hold folks accountable. And I'm sure Art would agree with that. And so he is here today, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk with him because off air, when he and I have been out at events, or he's called me on the phone for something, I've gotten a chance to hear his story, and I think it's a really fascinating one that you're all going to really enjoy. So, Art, thanks so much for being here.
James, I appreciate the invitation. I think it's really interesting because usually you're interviewing journalists who we spend all of our time interviewing other people. We never talk about ourselves. And so this is interesting to talk about my background and how I got here and how it informs my writing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And that's why we do it, because I think I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of interesting people that are journalists, and sometimes behind the name on the byline or the person you see on TV, people don't know. And so I think this is a really cool way to do it. So thanks for doing it. And let's jump right in here. So Art, let's share with folks, how did you grow up, and, how did you become civic minded? Being in the newspaper business, usually you want to create some kind of change. So talk about that a little bit.
James, if somebody would have told me when I was a kid, or even 20 years ago, that I'd end up being a journalist and writing about people that are the community leaders and putting my name out in the community like this, I would have said that was impossible. But I'm actually pretty much of an introvert. For people who don't know me, and some people who know me aren't even going to believe it when they hear me say that, but I don't socialize a lot. I have a small group of friends. I don't go to big events. It's not really my thing. But when I was a kid, when I was 13 years old, I used to deliver the San Diego Tribune before the Union and the Tribune merged. It used to be a morning paper in San Diego. The San Diego Union was the morning paper, and the afternoon paper was the San Diego Tribune. And I used to deliver the Tribune after school when I was in middle school.
I had no idea that even happened. I'm newer here, 5 years, but I didn't know they merged.
Yeah, that's why it's hyphenated. San Diego Union Tribune were two different papers, same company. There was a morning edition that printed late at night and came out early morning. And then there was an updated afternoon version. There was the Union was blue, a masthead, the Tribune was green. I was team green. I used to deliver the paper. So my friends got up early in the morning before school and had to check the paper in the morning. But, when I did that, I never imagined I'd be a newspaper owner or publisher. I wrote my background, delivered about 100 newspapers, and I did that for about a year and a half. But when I was in high school, though, when I was 17, I met this English teacher, my junior year in high school, that changed my life. She was a little old lady at the end of her career, and for some reason, she pulled me aside after 2 or 3 days, I guess, at the beginning of the school year, and she suggested that I take another class that she had that was a public speaking and debate class. And I had no interest in that at all. It just, like I said, I'm an introvert. Stand up in front of a room full of people was not my thing. The first day I transferred over to try it for a couple of days. I really liked her. For some reason we really clicked. So my first day there was the first week of school. And I had gone to an elementary school junior high and high school about a block away from each other. I grew up in Chula Vista. My parents still live in the same house where I grew up.
That's cool.
And so I knew a lot of people in every class. I knew people in every class. So I drop into this class, and the first day she tells me to stand up in front of the class and introduce the person sitting next to me. And I had to speak for at least 1 minute. And so the person next to me was my old friend David Chapman. Grew up with him since kindergarten. His dad was a high school football coach, super popular guy. And I know him really well. I stand up, and it was torture to stand in front of the class. You know, kids giggling and like kids do. And my ears were burning. I was all sweaty. And it seemed like an eternity to go for 60 seconds up there. So she rings the bell at 60 seconds. I sit down, and it was horrible. So at the
You're
end
like,
of class,
whoo, I'm done. Thank the
yeah,
Lord.
right. Well, at the end of class, she said, so what'd you think? I said, this was the worst thing ever. I'm done. I'm out of here. She said, no. She said, no, please give us some time. I think this will be good for you. And she must have seen something in me that I didn't recognize. She thought she could break me out of my shell. And so I ended up transferring into the class. And by the end of that year, I was competing in speech contests on weekends up and down the state with her, this teacher, a lot. And we spent a lot of time together. And I won some trophies, and it became this really interesting process to write speeches, memorize them, and deliver them in this competitive environment. And so at the end of that school year, so this is now when I'm 17 years old, she introduced me to her son, who I didn't know anything about politics, but he was a politician, an elected official at the time. And she introduced me to him, and he offered me an internship that summer. So this is between my junior and senior year in high school.
Yeah.
And I went to his office, and I didn't think anything of it. I hardly saw him. He was up in Sacramento. But I would see the mayor and the congressman. The office for the congressman was next door. And I saw these community leaders coming in and out of the office all the time. And I got to meet the governor, and I just got hooked. I got to see like a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. And at the end of that summer, he offered me a job, the lowest paid job in the legislature's office clerk, one.
Okay.
But I had a state check when I was 17 years old.
That's pretty cool, man.
I had a job. So I worked for him through my senior year in high school, because what he told me at the end of that summer was, if you think this is interesting, wait till next year when it's election year. And so this was going into an election cycle, and I got to see the campaign and the election, and all that. I was hooked. I gave up. I really wanted to be an architect when I was a kid. And when I was a senior in high school, I applied to architecture schools. I got into San Luis Obispo, to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, my top school I wanted to go to. Mm-hmm. And I gave all that up, because by the time I was done in high school, I was hooked on politics. So I ended up working for him for 13 years, a little over 13 years.
Oh, my.
So I went from being a high school intern to his last chief of staff. I ended up, I was the woman who hired me as an intern. I ended up being her boss later.
Oh, wow. So, that's a full circle.
Yeah, that's a lesson there. Always be nice to the intern, because you never know. That intern could be your boss someday.
Right.
I never expected that. Every month and every year was, hey, this is an interesting job. I'm learning a lot of things. Never did I think it would become a long-term thing. Never could I imagine that I'd end up, now it's been 34 years since that internship.
Wow.
And so, it changed my life. I ended up being, during that time when I worked in the legislature, I knew all the politicians in town, obviously. I'm a Democrat. I ended up being the chairman of the San Diego County Democratic Party when I was 26 years old.
Wow.
I worked for the White House. I was a traveling advance team leader for the White House. I used to do advance when the president, vice president travel. And then I was a delegate to the 2000 Democratic National Convention. So, I got very into politics, very into partisan politics. And so, but then I left working in politics in 2002. So more than 20 years ago, I left being a staffer. Yeah. And I was a consultant. I've run dozens of campaigns. And I was a consultant on, kind of PR, private side of what you do. But, a couple of years ago, it's now been 8 years. September of this year will be 8 years when I had an opportunity to buy La Prensa. And so La Prensa I knew for a long time. Had been around at that point 39 years. The original founder, the original publisher was Dan Munoz Sr. very interesting gentleman. He was a Chicano studies professor, and he passed away in 1993. Mm-hmm. And then his son kept the paper going. And in 2015, he wanted to retire, and there was no next generation to take it over. Yeah. And so there was an opportunity, and I bought the paper to preserve it, to keep it going and to grow it. And I didn't really intend to write articles myself. We have a stable of writers. But as some of these political stories started coming, I was giving more information to the reporters than they knew. And at some point, the story was more mine than theirs.
Right.
And they didn't want to put their names on it anymore. And so I started writing stories, and I've now written hundreds of stories. I've won some awards. I won a prestigious award in 2021, the Ruben Salazar Award, the national award, for a piece that I wrote. And so I've now grown into it. You know, a lot of people, when I first bought the paper, journalists and political people were all suspicious because it's very rare for somebody to go from politics to journalism. It's usually the other way around.
Yeah,
There are several PR people in agencies and the political offices today, the mayor's office, the VA's office, the port district, former reporters, most of them UT reporters,
right,
or TV reporters, and they go with that knowledge base into politics. Well, I went the other way around.
Yeah, that's completely unique. You're totally right. Like that's a whole different thing.
There's nobody in town. Yeah, there's nobody in town that's done that, and so. It was an opportunity to take my skill set, my experience, my view of politics, and to help inform the community, to better inform the community. There are already all these journalists in town that are trained as journalists, and they do a good job, but they all kind of have the same background, the same viewpoint. And I thought it'd be more interesting and more valuable to the community to have a different voice. You know, there's no reason to stand in line with everyone else and do the same thing. So our approach has been more investigative reporting, deep dives into political stuff that is more my wheelhouse,
right,
of my experience.
What do you think? No, I think that's fascinating, and I think that's that when we talked, that was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on Flack Talk, is because I think you're right, that jump from politics to journalism usually doesn't happen, and I thought, wow, like it's happened, and have you seen, like you mentioned, like that initially people were skeptical, they weren't sure about it. Has it changed? Like has people's view of what you're doing changed? I mean, look, I saw you at the SPJ event, you were sponsoring it, I've seen people kind of follow some of your stories. Like, do you feel like you kind of earned their respect and support coming, now that you made that switch?
I joke, it took me 8 years to be an overnight success at journalism. I had to prove myself because so many people were skeptical, because they thought I would be partisan because of my background in democratic politics. Mm-hmm. They thought I would be biased toward my friends or against people that were on the other side. Or they thought I was trying to get myself, God forbid, get myself elected to something, right? And so they couldn't believe that it was really a serious effort. And I've been called things, representative for an elected official a few years ago, said I wasn't a real journalist. He called me a political hack. Mm-hmm. That person used to be a reporter. So my response to him was, so you think there's only a one-way road? You can only go from journalism to politics. You can't go from politics to journalism. We've written a lot of stories. We've broken some big stories that even today still haven't been confirmed and written by other people. One you're probably very familiar with, but we were the first ones to report a couple of years ago, the 101 Ash building debacle in downtown. We were the first ones to report that Jason Hughes got paid, and nobody believed it. And he wouldn't deny it, but he wouldn't admit it. And it was like 9 months until somebody else was able to confirm that. And a story that we broke, that the decision to lease the 101 building instead of buying it was done in one meeting inside of Mayor Kevin Faulconer's office. We reported on it, and the mayor's spokesman said it wasn't true. 9 months later, when people were under oath, they admitted almost verbatim what we reported. Now, how did I know that? I wasn't in the room, right? 9 people were in the room. So clearly, I joke with people, I'm either the luckiest guesser in the world or I have good sources.
Right.
Which one do you think is more likely?
I want to get into that source stuff, and I want to talk a little bit more about those stories that you break that others follow. But before we jump there, what do you think is the biggest difference and the biggest similarity between having worked in an elected office like you did and owning and writing for a news outlet? Are there differences and similarities?
Well, let me tell you the similarity, and I truly believe this, having been a government employee for 13 years, like you are at the county, right? Mm-hmm. We have a duty to the public. Well, that's our boss at the end of the day, right? Whether we work for a politician or whatever, at the end of the day, we're public servants. And they should be transparent, and they should be giving the public as much information as they can. And the media is reporting on that and trying to get as much information to the public as they can, right? And I think what happens is sometimes people in government forget who they really work for. I've sued, I think, 11 times now over public documents. We've sued public agencies when they don't give us public documents that we're entitled to. We have a constitutional right, the public does. The media is just part of the public. I filed these lawsuits in my own name to get documents, right? We've won every single case that we've filed. And sometimes we see these agencies spending taxpayer dollars to fight against releasing a document to the public. And I sit back and think, this is the public fighting the public. It doesn't make any sense. And I ask them sometimes, do you guys realize who you're keeping this from? You're keeping it from your own bosses. And so I think that when you ask what the similarities are, we're both trying to get to the truth, right? I always say, when people say we have an agenda, I say, you're right, we have an agenda. Accountability through transparency. That's my agenda. If we don't know what the government is doing, then we can't hold them accountable. That's all. I mean, none of this is personal. I don't sit around and, twiddle my thumbs and think of how I can write horrible stories about people. We're asking questions that the public is asking. And if the public knew more about what was going on, they'd be asking the same questions that I'm asking. There are tough questions to be asked. And I know that they don't like the tough questions. They treat me badly. I think a lot of elected officials' offices recoil when they see me. and it kind of wears on you, right? I mean, I have thick skin, but nobody likes to be hated. But it comes with the territory. So I do with my eyes open. I'm respectful to people. I'm not a loud guy. I'm not a big guy. They just don't like the coverage.
Yeah, well, look, having worked in elected offices, each situation is different. There's different situations in which you want reporters, and there's situations where you don't want reporters. I mean, and then there's, look, I think there's anyone who is of, working to ask questions, sometimes the tough questions. There's always people that don't want to hear them. I mean, that's a kind of a normal kind of, that's a normal thing. And that's why us PR people are here to help facilitate and figure it out. So I appreciate you sharing, kind of that perspective, because I think we as PR people, we're kind of a gatekeeper in some respects. We're kind of a person on the front door. And the reality is we all can pick up the phone when you call. Now, whether or not we can give you the information that you want is a different story sometimes.
Right.
But,
But look, James, and having been a staffer also informs my view. I talked to you one day, off the record about, I understand the loyalty and the protection and the protectiveness for your boss when you're working for a staff. As a staffer, I totally get it. I worked for a guy for 13 years, right? I had to go into battle for him. Totally get it. And when somebody is asking tough questions or they're writing bad articles, you feel under attack. I totally get that. And I try to diffuse the situation. Well, when I see the mayor of San Diego, I've known him for years. I call him mayor out of respect. I could easily call him by his first name. I don't think it's appropriate for me. Right. And so I deal with it in a professional way. I see the police chief. He criticized me the other day. He says that he's heard from his officers that I'm rude to them. I'm never rude to them, because when I call 911, I want them to come help me too, right? So, I'm always, I don't want to be the last guy on the list of a response. So, I try really hard to not make it personal and to be professional. But it gets under people's skin, and I get that, and I don't blame them for it.
Yeah, no, that's hey, look, accountability is why the media is here, and it's sometimes it's a jousting match, but it's a required, necessary thing for our society to really operate the right way. And I get it, I appreciate it, and sometimes I don't love it, right? But like most of the time, people are doing their jobs. I want to jump into this question because like you talked about sources, right? And earlier you shared some stories about some things that you were, well sourced on and you had before others and things like that. Can you talk to us a little bit about, what makes someone a good source? Do they have to have a certain level of importance? What is important when La Prensa is looking at a person as their source?
Well, it's always about information, right? It doesn't have to be at the top. Sometimes we've had information from low-level staffers that were involved in a meeting or heard something or got an email, and they don't think that what's going on is right. And they can't say anything. They don't want to risk their jobs, but they want it to get out. And so, over 34 years of being in politics, I know a lot of people. Some people don't admit in public that they know me, but they know me. So we get some back channel information or documents. But more and more, now that we've written so many stories and broken stories and taken heat and stood up to powerful people, we've started to get anonymous sources. And not anonymous as in we don't know who they are. They're people who we didn't know before. They'll call us, and first they talk to us and want anonymity as far as not being named. Okay. We figure out who they are. But usually, we don't take somebody's word for it. It's really dangerous unless I have multiple sources. But usually someone will come to us with an email or a document or something that leads us down the path to be able to prove this thing that they're alleging. The other day I got one in the mail. It was a blank white printed out letter with no return address addressed to me. And the first sentence is, I'm providing this to you because you seem to be the only journalist willing to write these stories. And it's an insider in a local city here in San Diego with some information about some things that happened, gave me names and dates and case numbers of people who had, and it all was 100% true. I don't know who the person is. I didn't rely on anonymous information. It was just a lead that somebody gave us that led to a story that we haven't published yet, but it's coming. So sometimes I can tell you who it was. There are other times that we don't even know, but we never rely on an anonymous person in the shadow and risk our reputation on a hunch or an allegation. So, we're very careful. And we turn down a lot of stories, James. We've had people come to us with personal things about people, and we say that's not the kind of stuff that we do.
Right.
And we don't take everything that comes through the door. So, I always tell people, I feel like I'm a custodian of La Prensa San Diego. It was around 39 years before me, and I may not be the last publisher. And so I don't want to risk La Prensa's credibility because I do something foolish or partisan or biased. Mm-hmm. And so I always keep that in mind. There's there's my reputation and there's La Prensa's reputation. Right now, they're very, very tied together. But I don't want to damage the brand and ruin what other people had built for a long time.
Right. Art, before we hit our breaking news run here, I want to know, we talked a little bit about, you said like I'm a little bit of an introvert, stuff like that. But look, when you're running a news operation, there's a lot of deadlines, there's a lot of information coming at you, stuff like that. How do you blow off steam? Like, what are some things you enjoy doing? What do you do for fun? What's the what like give us a window behind the curtain. That doesn't make sense. Give us a peek behind the curtain of like, what do you like to do, man? Like, how do you fill your free time?
You're not going to believe it, and we could do a whole other show about this. But
we got a little bit of time, so give us a little bit of taste.
Well, look, I grew up riding motorcycles since I was 3 years old. I used to race dirt bikes. When I was 17, my dad, my brother, and I started riding Harleys. I ride off-road vehicles, all kinds of stuff.
Oh, wow.
For 25 years ago, I started skydiving.
Really?
So I was a skydiver for about 8 years. a lot, hundreds of jumps. And that led me to falling in love with airplanes. So I now am a licensed pilot. I fly around a lot. And I'll be flying this weekend.
Wow,
but
you're an
I'm
adventure
actually
seeker, man. Those are all adventurous.
Well, hang on. Well, let me tell you where it all leads to, right?
Okay.
So last year I started planning and training for. I'm planning in this coming March. I'm going to depart San Diego for a 60-day, 42-country trip by myself in a small airplane.
No way.
It's a world record attempt. No pilot has ever done a single engine solo pilot flight to all 7 continents, all the way down to Antarctica, all the way around the world. But I'm going to do it as a journalist. I'm going to interview people at every stop. And it's kind of an adventure / anthropological research. I'm going to ask people the same 3 questions in 42 countries in different cities, random. The 5th person I run into, pull them aside and say, here are the 3 questions. And I'm not going to prejudge what I think people are going to say, but my premise is that people are a lot more alike than they are different, regardless of country and culture and language. And I think the world is actually smaller than we think it is. And I've flown to other parts of the world commercially, and it's like being transported, right? Like I got on an airplane in LA and laid down flat. I ate, I watched movies, and then next thing I knew, I was wearing the same clothes, and I'm in Beijing or Shanghai or whatever. There was no appreciation for distance or what it takes to get there or anything, right? It's like when you're a kid, you go to Disneyland, you get in the car, and you fall asleep, and then your parents wake you up in the parking lot at Disneyland. You know, that was cool.
Right.
Yeah, well, dad had to drive for 2 hours in traffic.
Right. No appreciation for dad. In fact, he had to hold using the bathroom so he can get you there on time. All that.
You sleep on the back. Well, so for me in a small plane, we fly low and slow. I see the terrain, the roads, the colors, and it's like riding a bike to work as opposed to driving on the freeway. So I want to see the world by myself, fly myself around the world, to all 7 continents, over all 5 oceans of the world. And I want to come back and I want to write about what the world is really like from my perspective by myself.
Wow. Well, man, that's an amazing adventure. When do you plan? That's like, I got to imagine you got to like plan like, where do I stop to get gas? Where do I stop?
Everything.
Right?
Oh, yeah. The logistics are difficult, and you know the danger of it, right? There are long flights over water. My very last leg after 60 days, my very last flight will be from Hawaii to San Diego, 15 hours by myself in this little plane with only 1 engine. If something happens to the engine, I'm going to land in the next couple of minutes and wherever I am, right?
Is it 15 hours because it is a single engine? Is that why it takes that long?
Oh, yeah.
Because if you're in a commercial plane, it's like, what, 4 or 5 hours from like LA?
Yeah, it's like 5 hours. Yeah, they're doing 500 miles an hour, and I'm doing 150 miles an hour.
Wow.
So
okay.
It's a long, long way, right? So you got to carry extra fuel and a raft and this flotation suit and
oh my gosh,
contingencies for emergencies, right? But that's the adventure part. But when you ask me, what do I do to blow off steam? I got to tell you, the reason I do this stuff, because it is dangerous. Every flight is kind of dangerous. I had a little semi-emergency last week that kind of spooked me, but I focus so much on flying, and it was also true about skydiving. You're so focused on not dying in this thing that you're doing that takes so much concentration that it's the only time that it ever pushes everything else out of my head.
Oh wow!
I don't think about work. I don't think about deadlines. I think about I've got to do this right so I don't die or kill my passenger who's flying with me, right? And so when I land from skydiving or when I land from flying a plane, I've got my mind's clear. It's kind of euphoric feeling. I think it's a mix of adrenaline and endorphins and a fear factor and this incredible relief that I cheated death again. And so that's my way of blowing off steam. Some people meditate. I fly in airplanes and risk my life, but I don't see it. I mean, I don't see it as crazy dangerous. I'm very careful about it. I train a lot. I take it very seriously. I love it. I love flying. I'm fascinated by the physics of it, that we can build a contraption that defies gravity. Mm-hmm. But I take it very seriously. It's not just a hobby for me. It's my passion. I really enjoy it.
That's pretty awesome, man. I mean, like, look, I think this is like telling, right? There's, people, would think naturally that maybe someone who's in politics or journalism is this outgoing kind of person, but you're like, no, I'm a little bit of a kind of introvert. And then you think like, oh yeah, you're a writer and you like politics, and you're like, no, I blow off steam because I'm ballsy and want to jump out of a plane or fly across the world. I mean, like that's some big shit, man. Like that's pretty cool. I couldn't do that shit. Like I just definitely could not do that.
Well, let me tell you what kind of grounds me, and this is when people ask me if I'm ever afraid of the things that I write about people. Right? I write about the mayor, or I write about other people. And let me tell you 2 examples. We're going to do a big piece next month in September for Mexican Independence Day. But I have 2 relatives, direct descendants, same last name. My grandfather and my great-grandfather. My grandfather and great-great-grandfather. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was in the Mexican Revolution with Pancho Villa. And just about every Mexican says that, except that my grandfather is in one of the most famous pictures in Mexican history.
Really?
There's a picture of Pancho Villa and Zapata in the president's office, where Pancho Villa is sitting in the president's chair. It looks like a throne. And there are about 20 people standing around them. Mm-hmm. And in that picture is my grandfather. He was in the room where it happened. Right? Wow. And so he was in the Mexican Revolution, got shot at, rode horses, and risked his life for this reform in the revolution, right? Mm-hmm. His grandfather, my great-great-great-grandfather, was the last congressman of Alta California when California was part of Mexico. Okay? He was a district attorney. He was a customs agent in charge of the port in Monterey, where Pebble Beach is now. But he later became an elected congressman, was the last congressman before the Mexican-American War of 1846. Wow. And he wrote to Congress and the Mexican president saying, we need more troops to defend California. We're going to lose California. And we have these important ports, mm-hmm. and we have gold in the ground. And he actually wrote, we'd rather lose Texas than California. And nobody listened to him, James. So you know what he did?
What?
He printed his letters to Congress in pamphlets and handed them out.
Really?
And some of those pamphlets and some of his letters to President Santa Anna are in the libraries at Yale, at Berkeley, UCLA, his original letters. Nobody believed him. California was a remote territory that was not very well known in Mexico, and they ignored him. And in 1846, American troops, Marines, landed in LA, and Mexico lost what is basically the Western United States.
Wow.
So, so he stood up to the president, Congress, wrote letters, even got so desperate to print pamphlets and hand them out. So, maybe it's in the blood, or maybe it's just an example, but compared to what I do, they actually risk their lives, right? I write stories and publish stuff. So not to diminish the importance of what we do, but I think that they took bigger risks than I take. And so when people ask me if I'm scared, yeah, I don't like making enemies. But at the end of the day, I think other people in the past have done it. Other newspaper publishers have done it for years. And I think what we do is more old school journalism than it is something new. It's a throwback to when papers were owned by individuals, whether it was Hearst or Pulitzer, or even here in town when the paper was owned by the Copley family, mm-hmm. when the UT was, right? Now they're corporate creatures, like we just saw the UT just sold again to a hedge fund that is known for decimating local papers.
Right.
And so what I do, I think, is old school. It's an important part of the landscape of San Diego media. And we're just a little piece trying to tell stories, inform the public.
Hey, man, I really appreciate that. Let's, and it's a great way to wrap up kind of the formal, we'll call it the formal news or question section. But I want to get into this breaking news, because that was a whole good segue into some of these like rapid fire breaking news questions I'm going to ask you. All right. So I got about like 10 of them or so. I'm going to rattle through them, and you give me what you think. All right.
Okay.
All right. So it's like breaking news, the Fast and Furious from Art. This is what we're doing here. All right.
All right.
So, Art, what's your favorite word?
Thanks.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
I like that. I think it's important to say it and to hear it.
Yeah. What's your least favorite word?
Can't.
Yep. I remember grandparents and parents saying, don't put that in your vocabulary.
I hate using it. I always tell people, I'm Mexican, I'm Mexicant.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Helping people.
Okay. What turns you off?
Hate.
Art, what's your favorite curse word?
That's funny. I don't curse a lot, but I'd say when something happens, I slam my finger or something's bad, I guess I let out a fuck.
All right. What sound or noise do you love?
I love laughter.
Okay. Is there a sound or noise that you hate?
Screaming. It really drives me crazy.
Other than, politics and newspapers, what other profession would you like to attempt one day?
Oh, I'm too old to attempt something. What I really want to do is I wish I would have been an astronaut, but I'm too old to attempt that. But I think it's funny. I think someday I'd like to farm.
Okay. Interesting. Well, that's good.
Grow
That's
food,
relaxing.
have some animals, and I really think I'd enjoy that.
Yeah. Is there a profession that you've seen out there that you just go, that's not for me? I wouldn't like to do that.
Oh, sure. I've been very lucky, right? My dad was a truck driver when I was a kid, and I thought it was the coolest job in the world. And I used to ride around the truck with him sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one time I told my dad, I can't wait till I get my license and I can drive. My dad had several trucks and he had drivers.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day as a kid, I said, Dad, someday when I get my license, I can drive one of the trucks behind you and we can do twice the amount of work. Right now we're both in one truck.
Right.
It's kind of a waste. My dad told me, if you ever drive trucks, I'll be really upset. He said, I drive trucks so you don't have to. And I didn't understand that for years and years, right? I mean, I work with my hand, with my mind and at a desk. I don't dig ditches or, drive trucks and do things that a lot of people do, important jobs that thankfully I've never had to do. So there are a lot of jobs I wouldn't want to do. But push come to shove, I think I would attempt anything.
Gotcha. So if heaven exists, Art, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Nice landing.
I like it. Hey, Art, this has really been fun. I've really enjoyed, talking through some stuff that you and I kind of talked about some of these things off air before, and to hear them now laid down on this track is really awesome. I'm wondering, just like you would ask me if I was working for someone, is there anything else you'd like to share with our Flack Talk listeners before I let you go?
I think when it comes down to it, I think what I do in media is really a reinforcement of what I believe about politics. I have this kind of mythical view of politics that voters are like a jury in a courtroom. And you can't lie to them in court. You can't trick them. You have to give them all the information. And then they go away into a room where you don't see them and they make a decision. And then they come back and we have to live with that decision, right? And I think that in politics, the electorate should be viewed by the people engaging in politics as a jury. And so the campaign should be fair and they should inform people. And then the public goes away and on election day they vote, and we should uphold those and respect the outcome, even when we don't like it. And there have been outcomes in my elections that I didn't like. I've had candidates that lost, and I thought it was a better candidate. But at the end of the day, the jury decided based on all the information, and that was the candidate they chose. And so I think the only thing that's kept me sane in more than 30 years in politics is that I feel like if we inform the public right, in the right way, tell them the truth, give as much information as possible, they usually come up with the right outcome. And I don't know how, it's kind of magical, but it happens, right? Juries are 12 unknown, strangers, and they usually come out with a decision that usually makes sense. So I honestly believe that. And I think it's the only way to do this is to believe in the system enough. Because if we think it's rigged, then nobody's going to be happy with the outcome ever. We have to believe that Yeah, of course there are problems, and we have to fix things. But it's the best system we have. I think it's the best system in the world for picking our leaders. And we have to be more honest about the process and engage in it and then live by it. And there's going to be another election in a couple years. So it's never a final do or die to the death type of outcome. So that's what keeps me sane, believing in the system and believing in the process and honoring the outcome.
Well, that's awesome, Art. Art, thank you again for coming on Flack Talk. We really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation.
James, it's been great. I appreciate what you do on the other side. And if I ever call for a comment, I know that you're always good in trying to give me information. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
All right, take care.
If you liked Flack Talk and want to learn more about your favorite muckrakers and newsbreakers, please hit the subscribe button or visit flacktalk.com. New Flack Talk episodes with James Canning air every other week, wherever you get your podcasts.